Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and I can think of several very poignant scenes in different movies and shows where you're getting toward the final act, or you're in the final act and you've got something tragic happening, something horrible, and you're cutting back and forth between that and somebody else who would probably care, but they're either being obstructed from helping, or they are delayed or distracted, or they just simply don't know what's going on, and so they can't be there to do anything about the thing that is happening in the second half of what you're cutting back and forth between. And that's what I feel like we're getting here with the situation between Peter and what's going on outside in the courtyard in Matthew 26 and Jesus and what's going on inside the courtyard. Now, previously, I had likened this sequence in Matthew 26 to like one of those big Star Wars climactic moments where you got three different plot points unfolding at once and there's high drama and action everywhere. And I guess that still applies. It's just that now it's turned much darker because, as we discussed yesterday, the Rubicon has been crossed, the die is cast, and now we're laying hands on the Son of God. And we're doing so in ways that are abusive, insulting, violent. And if you believe the biblical narrative about who Jesus is and what's going on and what he represents and who's trying to thwart it, then you could also add to that list of negative descriptors, you could add demonic, satanic. What's happening here is monstrous. It's the height of injustice and insanity and madness, and everything that's virtuous and right and good is flipped on its head. Evil is running wild. The religious leaders seem to shout in unison, "He's worthy of death." It says in Matthew 26:67, "Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, 'Prophesy to us, Christ, who hit you?'" Over in Luke, we get maybe a little bit more of a description on what that's like. I think we're still in Luke 22. And yeah, this is how long it actually took me to find it. Just a minute. It's right toward the end. Verse 63. "The men who were guarding Jesus began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him and demanded, 'Prophesy, who hit you?' And they said many other insulting things to him." So between Matthew and Luke, you can really picture the scene and just the mocking, giddy, delighted evil. And it looks like it's the guards who are also participating in this. These low-ranking types. Jesus is a king, the true king, but what's happening here is really an attempt at massive mockery. "Oh, you're a king, are you? Well, does this happen to kings? Because, none of the kings I've ever seen get blindfolded and then punched and mocked and spat upon. That doesn't seem very kingly to you, does it? Maybe you're picturing a different kind of king or a different kind of kingdom. We're just going to hit you a few more times to further illustrate the point." And of course, the line, "Prophesy this, Christ, who hit you?" while he's blindfolded. Well, that's obviously their way of saying that they completely reject the notion that he's a prophet or that he's from God. But wow, when you go back and you look at the stuff that Jesus said at the end of his rebuke of these same people, at the end of 23, right? Yeah, at the end of Matthew chapter 23. "You snakes, you brood of vipers," is Jesus talking, "how will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore, I'm sending you prophets and wise men and teachers. Some of them you'll kill and crucify. Others you'll flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. I tell you the truth, all this will come upon this generation. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophets and stoned those sent to you, how often I've longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate, for I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Think about that passage in light of what is now happening 3 chapters later. It's another one of those "you've said it was so" kind of things, like we see in Jesus' response to Judas, like we see in Jesus' response a moment ago to the religious leaders, like we're going to see in Jesus' response to Pilate, when the enemies of Christ, through their own words, but with the wrong motives, kind of bumble backwards into saying things that were true or even confirming the truth of God. Here, Jesus says, "You guys are false, and you've never seen a prophet you didn't want to beat or stone." Well, now they're beating someone and calling him a prophet. The irony should not be lost on the reader. But then also look at that stuff about Jesus issuing this blistering rebuke. And what's the last thing he says at the end of it? "Look, your house is left to you desolate." Okay, a lot of people look at that and they go right to AD 70 and the destruction of the temple under Titus and Vespasian, the Romans, that is. But couldn't you just as easily say, look at this fiasco? I mean, a miscarriage of justice, a violation of the proper processes that are legally established, mockery, spitting, smacking people. You're church people. You're the religious leaders. What are you doing hitting people? What the heck is going on? Like, you want to see what it looks to have a house left to you desolate. Look at your leadership right now. Look at how they're acting, like absolute fools. I guess that's only half of the last thing he says. For then Jesus rounds out the thought at the end of Matthew 23 saying, for I tell you, you'll not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And what's the thing that Jesus said in Matthew 26 that caused the robes to just have to be ripped? It was just too offensive. It's Jesus' double down where he says, but I say to all of you, in the future you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. He's repeating what he said in his rebuke of them. So everything that he said they were, and everything he said about how things were going to work out for them, it only took 3 chapters for that to be demonstrated true. And add to that a layer of irony that they're sitting here punching him with a blindfold on, saying he's not a prophet. Okay, just a second. Let me just make sure I read that right. 3 chapters back. Okay, that's right here. And he said all the things I just read to you, snakes, brood of vipers. Okay, yeah, blood of righteous Abel would kill the prophets. Your house will be left desolate. Okay, blessed is he who comes in. Okay, let me just flip back over here to where we are now. I tell you, in future, Son of Man, hitting him and punching him, spitting on him and ripping your robe. Yeah, no, in fact, he just accurately prophesied right there and demonstrated that he was a true prophet in like the course of a couple days and a few pages of your Bible. The irony here is at peak levels. And as if that weren't enough to demonstrate that he's truly from God and that he is the fulfillment of prophecy and a prophet in and of himself, you get to Isaiah chapter 50 and verse 6. I offered my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who pulled out my beard. I did not hide my face from mocking and spitting. And also that corresponds to Isaiah 52:14. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any man, and his form marred beyond human likeness. Both of those are happening in the context of messianic prophecies in the Old Testament, and these religious leaders are unwittingly making the prophecies come true. The prophecies they're angry about being fulfilled, they are making come true. But as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, there's another drama unfolding outside. Jesus is taking this insane mistreatment. He's enduring this horrible indignity, and probably his best friend, or the person who has been the most loyal or wants to be the most loyal, bless his heart in every sense of the Southern expression, is right outside the door, unable to do anything. And why isn't he able to do anything? Well, because 1, this is supposed to happen, but 2, because Peter has pretty quickly shifted his attention from what can he do to help Jesus to what can he do to help himself. Now, Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. You were also with Jesus of Galilee, she said, but he denied it before them all. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. And just like that, for the reader, we start to hear the rooster crow in our own minds, even though the rooster has not done so yet in the text. We've been wondering, we've had this thing floating around out there. There's a betrayal, a denial that's coming. We thought maybe we saw it still in the garden back here on this page, but no, hasn't happened yet. Here we go. So the dramatic scene sets up with Jesus taking abuses that would make no sense for any normal person in custody and make the least sense ever in light of what's going on here. Abuses that are a mockery of God sending his prophets and his son, that are a mockery of the entire law and the prophets and everything that pointed toward this moment. Abuses that are the height of injustice and a tragedy for anybody who's reading and tracking with this story and going like, man, at least what I'm seeing in Matthew, this guy looks pretty fantastic. It looks like he's on to something, and it looks like the bad guys are winning, and all of this is in contrast with the most loyal follower Jesus has out in the courtyard already starting to wilt. Jesus really is being abandoned and left to this brutal fate that he knew was coming and that he's walked voluntarily into in service of his Father and of the grand redemptive plan. I need to say another great big thank you to everybody who supports the podcast at patreon.com/the TMBH podcast. We get to do this together because you choose to support the program. So that's rad of you. Also, if you don't support the program, it's just like, come on, it's totally fine. Glad that we get to hang out. I appreciate all of you, and I've really enjoyed working through the bright, happy, perky parts of this, as well as some of the darker passages like what we're looking at right now. More to come. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.